I'm going to create an ASP.NET web service. If I run this, this is an ASP.NET website, and this is running, and it's a little debugging web server that comes with Embarcadero Prism, and it just provides a simple to deploy, easy to use web server for debugging applications. It's only bound to your local port, so you can't serve pages off remotely with this, and it just chooses a random port number each time. So right now, we're just seeing the ASP.NET web page. So instead of ASP.NET web page, I want to turn this into a web service. And so to do that, I just remove this page here. Actually, you could leave it, but I'm going to go to remove it. And I go to add new item and scroll down to the bottom here and say web service. You can give it a name if you want to, or just leave it default. And so now we have a new web service here. So this web service by default has a single method on it called hello world that just returns hello world. So we can say hello Delphi from Prism. So if I run this now, so now it was taking us to this web service 1.asmx. So if I was to rename that something besides web service 1, that was what we would see here. And we see here's our hello world method that we published as a web method. And it's a message here telling us that we're using the temp URI namespace. So that is letting us know that here, where we specify the namespace, it's using the default one. So you're going to want to give this a different namespace before publishing this. Now, the purpose of a namespace is to provide a globally unique ID for your web service. The recommended best practice is you want to use a domain name you own and then something after that. Now, this namespace does not have to be the location of the web service. It may be the location of the web service, but it doesn't have to be the location. And so by using a domain name you own, and then if you keep track of what comes after the slash, you're able to govern that no one else is using your namespace as long as everybody uses their own domain names. We're going to leave it with temp URI for now. It works for our purposes, but so go ahead and click on this link here. And this page actually shows the what the SOAP requests and responses would look like for this web service. And it also has this invoke button. Now the invoke button is kind of useful for debugging the web service through the web browser. So if I click the invoke button, what it's going to do is it's actually call that method and give me the result set back. So it says hello Delphi from Prism. So now we're going to go into Delphi XC2. And this will work with FireMonkey, FireMonkey 3D, and VCL. So I've got a VCL application here. And we're going to go to Web Services and select WSDL Importer. Now, WSDL is the Web Services definition language. It's pronounced WSDL. And what it is it's a document, an XML document that describes the web service. Now, if we go back to our web browser here and go back to the main page, if we add a question mark, WSDL, to this, then it's going to give us the WSDL file that describes this web service. And this is what the WSDL file looks like. It's an XML document that describes the web service. It says this is the namespace that we have, and we have a element called hello world, and it produces a hello world response. Here's SOAP 1.0, here's SOAP 1.2, and different information in there. So the great thing about web services, or SOAP-based web services that have a WSDL, is the WSDL provides all the information necessary to generate a client application. On the other hand, with REST, you typically have to have a little bit of information from an external source that describes it in order to know how to interact. And select the WSDL importer, point to the WSDL. You can actually point it to a WSDL file, so if you download the WSDL file, you can just point it to that instead of pointing it to the website. And we're just going to go stick with the default. If you wanted to only use SOAP 1.1 or 1.2, you could do that. Some additional options here, which we're just going to stay with the default. Got to the web server, queried, got the WSDL document back from it, and then interrogated that document and turned it into a Pascal wrapper. And so what this does is it creates this web services interface that creates an interface to that remote document. So if we look at a remote document back in Prism again, it has a method called hello world that returns a string. And the class is called web service 1. And here we have web service 1 SOAP as a function called hello world that returns a string. So what this is doing is creating an interface for a proxy object that points to that remote web service. So you can call this interface call methods in this interface, which in turn call that proxy object, which marshaled over the internet to the web service and to get the result set back for you. I'm going to use that new unit we just imported, and we're going to create have an instance. We're going to keep track of this in here. So this is web service 1 SOAP is the name of the interface, and then in the constructor for our form here, we're going to say f service equals get web service 1 SOAP. Now we have some parameters here. You can leave these parameters empty. If the first one here, use WSDL, if you set that to true, what that's going to do is instead of querying the web service directly, it's going to hit the WSDL first. And what that allows is that if the WSDL gets updated to say that the service moved, so if we look in our WSDL here, it tells you the location of the web service. So if this could possibly change to a different location, then saying true here means to go get the WSDL and then find out if that location changed, or maybe if some other information has changed about that, it will update that. If you use the second parameter, the address, it actually makes this irrelevant. In this address, you specify specifically where to go to, and you can either specify the WSDL or the service itself. And this one allows you to use an HTTP Rio component, which is another component that allows to work for working with web services. If you don't specify this, it actually creates an HTTP Rio internally inside the implementation here. So we can go and look here and see if HTTP Rio is nil, then we go ahead and create one. So this just allows you to reuse, if you have your own HTTP Rio, to reuse that or to maybe share that one. So we're just going to leave it with no parameters here. Created an instance of it. It gets freed automatically because interfaces. And we're going to put a button down. And in our button, we're just going to say fservice.hello world. And we're going to say show message. So that's going to call this remote method here and get the result set back. So we'll go ahead and run this and hit the button, and it goes out and hits the service, hello Delphi from Prism. Actually going out and hitting the web service the first time, but then subsequent calls will be much faster because it's done a little bit of the upfront interrogation of the service to make sure it's there. Let's go ahead and look at how to expand our web service now and make it a little more interesting. The template that I used to create this is a little bit older, and so the string here is different, doesn't have the right case, and so we have these inline warnings here telling us that the string should be string uppercase. The latest version of Embarcadero Prism has these little magic wand here. I can't remember what the term is for it, but it allows you, it has a spell checker first of all, and other things like that. So actually, if I spelled string wrong, which is kind of cool, S-T-I-R-N-G, see, it highlighted that because it recognized that that's actually a string. I just spelled it wrong. So when I hit compile here, it says unknown type string, and I can say replace string with string. So it actually fixes my spelling for me. And then in this case here, it's just got the wrong case on it. It'll fix that case for me. Lots of cool features like that I think are neat. Let's go ahead and add another method here. And so the sum method is going to return an integer, and it's going to take two integers as parameters, A and B. And then we're going to use completion here, jump down here, and result equals A plus B. So it takes two parameters, returns the result. One thing, if I don't add this web method here, which I'm not going to do by default, I'll show you what it looks like. Notice it still says hello world here as the only method that web service supports. Now, in order to get it to support the new method here, I have to add this web method attribute to it, which is an incredibly simple way to do this. And now this sum is published. And so if you add new methods to your web service that aren't public, they're used internally. If you don't have web method on it, then it's only used internally in your on your server side. It's not used in the client side. But as soon as you add web method, then it gets published. So if I go ahead and run this again, see we now have a sum method on here. So now we're going to add that to the Delphi client, and we come in here and say, and we can run the WSDL importer again. It remembers the location from last time. This is why you don't want to change the name of this. It gives you the option to, when you save it, to rename it. I always leave it the same because then when you run it a second time, it says, hey, that file already exists. Otherwise, you have to remember what you renamed it to and remove the old one, rename it, put it back in. So leaving it the same name makes it easier when you regenerate the class wrapper. So it's updated this now. If we come back in here and look, we have two methods, hello world and sum. So I can come back now and add another button to my form. And this button we're going to call, I'll say show message int to string service.sum. So if we look here at service, we see we have the methods that we published on the remote are available to us, and it's just like it was a local object, which is really kind of cool. And we're going to say 10 and 20. We pass those in there. We run our client application, and there we go. So if you want to debug this from the Prism side, you can come here and set a breakpoint. And we'll go back to the Delphi client, and we hit the button, and boom, it stops. And we can inspect these values here like you would expect. Yeah, actually, you can change them. So I'm going to change that to 30 and give them a different result set back. So now I got 40 when we added 10 and 20. 40 is the wrong answer, but just to show you what you can do there. I can do this exact same thing again here in FireMonkey. Add visible. Come back over here. Web surface 1 soap, and then on the constructor, f service equals get web service 1 soap, and on the button click, show message. We'll just call that hello world. Same thing, except now we're calling it from FireMonkey. So this will work from OS 10 as well as from Windows, 64-bit, 32-bit, FireMonkey, VCL, etc.